What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing good. I'm doing good. This is the first time I'm filming a video without having to hold a microphone because I bought the DJI mini mics to record with my Action 4. So hopefully the audio is coming out good. But the reason I'm making this video today is to talk about what I think the best daily drivers for 30,000 Canadian dollars are. And I'm going to be buying a car hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So the research I've done for this article is very near and dear to my heart. Now, not too long ago, I made a video about the best cheap daily drivers, and that was really my preliminary research. So, in that video, I went through maybe I think 9 or 10 different dailies and asked people to comment. And each of those dailies, there was some criteria, just they had to be within a certain price range, they had to be able to be driven every day, have 4 doors, be able to handle, all types of weather. So, we're talking either all wheel drive or front wheel drive, and as I went through that, a lot of them were disqualified from it as I did the research based on their price or reliability or their aftermarket and whatnot. But I got a lot of flack on that video because I used the word cheap. And that was a mistake because, to be fair, the word cheap is subjective. What is cheap to someone else is not cheap to another. And I was very close to titling this current one the best affordable, but that I think runs into the same issue where the word affordable means something different to everybody else. Now, you could argue that, oh, maybe you should just include it because it gets people will click on it, and people obviously should know it's subjective, but I decided to name this one best daily drivers for $30,000 just because it gives you that price range. And if you truly are looking for cheap daily drivers and $30,000 is not cheap to you, well, then you know not to click on this video. And that helps remove pretty much exactly what I just explained happened in the previous video. But I'm going to stop rambling and start telling you guys a little bit more about the content. So after I made that original video with those 9 different cars, I never stopped researching. Sure, I'm writing other articles at the same time, but I did keep researching and kind of whittling it down to see exactly what I want and what are the winners to me. And as I went through it, I think prior to doing my research, I was dead set on the Civic Si. There was no other competitor in my mind. The 11th Gen Si is what I was going for. And as I got deeper into that article and started to do some more research, I realized there were some standout competitors that I think I'd put the SI up on this pedestal, and then this pedestal was just shattered by me doing my research, which quite literally by the power of knowledge, if you want to think about it that way. But my competitors for the SI brought me to the 4th gen Mazda 3 Turbo hatchback and the Mark 8 Golf GTI. Now, I'm not saying that they are better or worse than the SI, but what I am saying is that to me, they are comparable for what I want and what I like. What is it that what I want and I like? Well, we'll get into that a little bit later. And firstly, I think I want to talk about each of these cars one by one and rank them on some criteria, and then do a comparison between them and then a conclusion that can help me decide what I want and also help you decide perhaps what you want. Maybe, excuse me, I will probably just edit that out. Maybe I won't because I like to do these all in one take and I am a very lazy editor. But that being said, given that I've already put these cars through some initial criteria when I made the first article, I'm not going to evaluate basic things like whether or not they have 4 doors, whether or not they can handle all seasons, because to even make it into the previous article, they had to have already achieved that criteria. So here I'm going to be talking about some things that matter to me specifically more so. So I'd be talking about their stock power, their driving dynamics, their price, their comfort and practicality, as well as their performance potential and aftermarket support. So why don't we start with the Mazda 3 Turbo hatchback? I am partial to the hatchback. I think it looks better than the sedan, but enough of that. If we look at the stock power, the Mazda 3 Turbo makes 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque when given 93 octane. However, if you give it 87 octane, the numbers drop to 227 horsepower and I think 310 pound-feet of torque. And there's some things to unpack there. Given that drop in octane, it only lost 10 pound-feet of torque, which is impressive, but it did lose just over, 23 horsepower, I think is what it lost, which that is a fair drop. And the fact that it just will make different powers on different fuels is not surprising. It is surprising that a stock car is doing that. Nonetheless, 250 horsepower is very respectable. 227 is also decent. Now, if we look at the stock driving dynamics, I will preface this by saying the Mazda 3 will handle better than a lot of cars on the road. It is definitely not bad. However, it does have some limitations when being driven at the limits. Now, the Mazda comes with all-wheel drive, which is great. That's a plus, but it has a 6-speed torque converter based automatic, which frankly is not as fast as a DSG or a DCT automatic. It's going to have a little bit of a slower shift times than those guys, and it's just not as engaging as a manual transmission as well. So it's a very good option. It's much, much better than a CVT, which is what the vast majority of cars in the $30,000 price range offer, but there are better options available. It also has a torsion beam rear suspension as opposed to independent rear suspension. Mazda, of course, does an amazing job tuning their suspensions. We can see that in the Miata, both the old ones and the MX-5. Excuse me again. But the torsion beam suspension is limiting. It still won't be as good as independent rear suspension, which likely is something that nobody will notice unless they're pushing these cars to their limits. And if we look at acceleration, the Mazda 3 is impressive. It moves from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour or 60 miles per hour in between 5.6 and 6 seconds. And I really wanted to find a lap time to compare all of these cars across. Car and Driver helped me out a little bit with the lightning laps on, I think, the Virginia International Raceway, but they didn't run the Mazda 3 Turbo, at least not the 4th generation. I can't even find an official Nürburgring time for this car, but people approximate it to be between 8:30 and 8:45, which that's an approximation, so also not made by professional drivers. I take that with a grain of salt. Now, enough about the driving dynamics. If we take a look at the price, this is where the Mazda 3 I think really shines because you can find these things for less than $30,000 Canadian used regularly, and these cars come with a ton of features from the factory. I think just being the turbo model alone gets you Bose sound system, full leather interior, probably one of the best interiors in its class, if not the best interior in its class. And it just is a great value proposition for $30,000. I don't think there are any cars in the $30,000 price range that offer more luxury for this amount of money. I just don't. Maybe a 330i, but I don't think a 330i is in the $30,000 price range. And I think I can comfortably say what the Mazda lacks in driving excitement or driving dynamics, it kind of makes up for in luxury and comfort. If we also consider the fact that its suspension is tuned a little bit softer, it's going to offer you a very comfortable ride. It has all-wheel drive. It's going to be extremely practical. It's a hatchback. You're going to have a good amount of trunk space. However, the rear seats are surprisingly tiny. I think they might be the smallest in the class. I know for sure they're the smallest of all the cars in this video, which that takes a hit on practicality just because assuming you like to carry around 4 adults every now and then, the Mazda 3 rear seats are pretty tiny, which that's a drawback. Now, if we look at aftermarket support and performance potential, on paper, this car's 2.5-liter turbo sounds like it should have a ton of tuning potential. However, the tuning scene for the 4th gen Mazda 3s is just pretty small, so it's not as popular as it should be. What I found in my research is there are 3 main ways that people go about tuning these cars. There's a JB4, which a JB4 is not really a tune. You're more like spoofing the sensors to make the car make more boost at different points of the RPM range. There's DR Tune and Mazda Sauce. Now, DR Tune, again, I didn't do crazy research on these, but from what I found, there are several forum threads of people just complaining about DR Tune and it just not being as good as it should be. Mazda Sauce looks good. It has many great reviews, but from what I can tell, it doesn't seem like Mazda Sauce is sold by a company or through a website. It just seems to be you email this guy and he'll email you back a file, which isn't the most, I guess, trust-inspiring thing. However, again, it has great reviews on the internet, so I just might be wrong and skeptical for absolutely no reason. Now, that being said, that's not a whole ton of tuning support for the car. They can squeeze more power out of it. It's just the aftermarket scene for it is not quite as developed as other cars. So if we were to do an overall ranking, I'd say the stock power in the Mazda 3 is good, but not great because of the fact of just the variations between the octanes. It still is very good. I'd say the stock driving dynamics are okay. I'd say the price is great. comfort and practicality is great. The performance potential and aftermarket support is just okay because there are tuning options. They're just not the greatest options. And that lets us move forward to the 11th gen Civic Si, which, like I said, for the longest time was my golden child. Now, the 11th gen Si from the factory makes 200 horsepower and I think 190 pound-feet of torque, which is nothing spectacular by any means. It will move from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour or 60 miles per hour between 6.8 and 7.1 seconds, which, again, that is not a stellar number by any means. Excuse me. There isn't an official lap time for the SI in the Nürburgring, but Car and Driver do have a lightning lap on the Virginia International Raceway that came in at 316.9. And although these power slash performance numbers on the SI aren't amazing, it makes up for it in the driving dynamics. So this car probably has the best in class manual transmission. It's just seems like a joy to drive. Everybody that touches it has nothing but great things to say about it, and that follows with Honda's history. Honda has a history of producing great manual transmissions, second maybe only to Porsche. Now, a lot of reviewers express the sentiment this car is extremely fun to drive and it feels like a scalpel, meaning it just has great driver inputs. It comes with a limited slip diff from the factory, independent rear suspension, great steering inputs. People say that when they drive it, you can really push it to its limits as well because it doesn't make a ton of power. So you can actually shift through these gears and you're not going to hit felony speeds. However, that's a double-edged sword because although reviewers and I guess people that drive cars at their limit every day love the fact that you can actually push the SI to the limit on normal roads. A lot of everyday users say that that's not necessarily a great thing. Why? Because it makes it feel like you always have to push the car to the limit to be having fun. There isn't much casual fun to be had, if that makes sense. It also kind of makes the car feel like it's struggling, which that's not something I'd considered until I started to really dive into user reviews of the SI. Now, if we look at pricing, the SI used can go for just in and around 30,000 Canadian, which I think is a fair price for what the car offers. The limited slip diff, great manual, exceptional handling. I think exceptional handling can warrant this price tag. The SI, when it comes to comfort and practicality, does have some creature comforts. It will come with heated seats, front and rear, heated steering wheel, 12-speaker Bose sound system from the factory. And these are, I think, a decent list of creature comforts. They're nothing crazy, like in comparison to what we just came off of with the Mazda 3, but they're also not terrible. And also, I'm speaking here about the Canadian spec, not the American spec. There are a lot of differences when it comes to creature comforts between them. Rear seat room in the SI is exceptional. You can fit fully grown adults in there extremely easily. They'll have plenty of space, decent sized trunk as well, which earns it some more practicality points. The limited slip diff can also help the front wheel drive system in inclement weather, i.e., snow. Now, if we look at the aftermarket scene and tuning scene, the SI is one of the oldest tuner cars on the market, probably second only to the GTI. These cars have been around for forever, and people have been tuning them and working on them for forever. So it should come as no surprise that there are several tunes available for the 11 Gen SI, and these are reliable. People have been running them. They are from reputable companies. There are companies like Fearable, Two Step Performance that administer off-the-shelf tunes through usually a K-tuner or sometimes Hondata, but I think it's typically K-tuner. And these off-the-shelf tunes can get you to about 240 horsepower. You can make that reliably and safely from what I've read on the forums with some limited bolt-ons, but if you try to go beyond 240 horsepower, your cost increases exponentially now. If you want to push that much power, typically you're going to need to do your head studs, you're probably going to need a new clutch, many more bolt-ons. It just becomes a money sink that you're spending a lot of money to make not that much more power, which is the issue. And on top of that, this engine starts to, I think, reach its limits around 350 pound-feet of torque. So despite having a good aftermarket support and tuning scene, this platform is just hardware limited. You can only get so much out of that 1.5 liter motor before it starts to become a little bit dangerous or a little bit iffy as to whether or not you should try to push more. So if we rank this overall, just like I did for the Mazda, stock power, it's going to get just an okay because 200 horsepower isn't crazy. Driving dynamics, it gets great, borderline exceptional because of how great they are. The price, I'd say, is good. It's not amazing, but it's good. Comfort and practicality is also good. It doesn't have as many features, but it's still good. And the performance potential slash aftermarket support is just good because they even each other out. Really good aftermarket support, not so good performance potential because of the hardware. This brings us to our third vehicle on my list, third and final vehicle, the Mark 8 Golf GTI. So from the factory, Mark 8 GTI makes 241 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque from a 2-liter turbo, which is the EA 888 motor. Now, these are very respectable power numbers, and a point I think that we should make here is that it makes this power on 87 octane. It's not going to change drastically when you jump to 93, but if you drop from 93 to 87, it's still 241 horsepower. If we look at some numbers, the GTI moves from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, or 60 miles per hour, between 5.1 and 6 seconds. That's a big variation in range. That's just because you can get the Mark 8 in a DSG or a manual. The Mark 8.5 is only automatic, but we are looking at the Mark 8 because we're buying used. Now, that causes the variance. Obviously, your DSG is going to be faster than your manual in your 0 to 60 time. The GTI has a Nürburgring time. Of course, it's kind of irrelevant, but it has, because no one else on this list has one, but it's 7:46:13. Car and Driver set a lightning lap time of 3:11 on the Virginia International Raceway, which was faster than the SI by, I think, 5 seconds. These are very respectable numbers in my book, especially when you consider the GTI is front-wheel drive. And if you are in tune with automotive news, the 50th anniversary edition of the GTI just set the Nürburgring lap time record for a front-wheel drive car, beating out the Civic Type R, which is very impressive. And I'm very curious to see what the Golf R is going to do after that. But anyways, moving on. If we start talking about driving dynamics, as we mentioned before, you can either get this in a 7-speed DSG automatic, 6-speed manual. In addition to this, the front-wheel drive hatchback comes with a limited slip diff in the front. Reviewers frequently mention that the manual transmission in the GTI isn't the greatest and could use improvement, with users usually changing out different parts of it just to make it a little bit better. And while the DSG is just amazingly fast, it doesn't give you the same engagement as a manual transmission would. That being said, the 241 horsepower in this car does make it more exciting to drive on a commute, because this is power that you can kind of just put your foot down in the middle of the RPM range, have some fun with it. If you just get a clear stretch of highway, if you find yourself on a back road, you don't need to push the car to its limit just to have a good time. And if we look at pricing, well, the GTI is the most expensive of the bunch, coming in between 31 and 35,000. Why is there such a variation? The variation is there just because of the different trim levels. This car has several different trim levels. When we were talking about the SI and the Mazda 3, the SI is a trim level, so that is what you're getting. That's just a fixed price. Mazda 3 Turbo, I think, has very, very few options. It's also kind of a trim level, whereas the GTI here is a car. You can get the GTI. In Canada, it goes, I think, base or S, then the Autobahn, then the performance trim, just different scaling than America. Now, if we go back to pricing, you can get, I think, a good amount of luxury. If you go to the higher trims, you'll get memory seats, I think heated and ventilated seats in the top trim, whereas the base doesn't necessarily have that, but the base still has a lot of features. But it's not a cheap car. I think a lot of that comes from the performance you're getting. If we go into comfort and practicality, you get a lot of the things that the SI offered. You're going to get limited slip diff with a front-wheel drive, platform. The rear seat room here is okay, not quite as impressive, but also not quite disappointing either. It's not bad enough for reviewers to complain about it. Excuse me. The hatch gives you a lot of cargo space. I'm sure you've seen the memes of Golfs fitting a 65-inch TV in the back when you put the seats down, and it offers a fairly quiet and comfortable ride too when you're driving it in a relaxed manner. The GTI has also been around for a few decades now, so its tuning scene is very, very well established. It's also one of the oldest tuning cars on the market right now. And as you can imagine, tons of reputable tuning companies. There's Unitronic, EQT, I can't remember the rest of them off the top of my head, but there are just several. And Stage 1 tunes here, off the shelf, with minimal bolt-ons, are making over 300 horsepower easily. If you add an aftermarket downpipe with a few more bolt-ons, Stage 2 can take you over 400 horsepower, which is just ridiculous. It blows everything in this class out of the water. Furthermore, the 2.0-liter turbo has so much performance potential in it. When you couple that with the large aftermarket scene and tuning scene, This is just a deadly combination. So if we were to rank it again, stock power in the GTI is great. It makes 241 across all octanes of fuel. Stock driving dynamics are good just because I don't think either of its transmission options are perfect. The price is just okay because it is a little bit pricey. Comfort and practicality are good. Performance potential slash aftermarket support is great. Now we enter our comparison. So what I'm going to do is go through each of these metrics and pick a winner. So if we start with stock power, well, the Mazda 3 technically has the highest stock power with its 250 horsepower, but it only makes that 250 horsepower on 93 octane. If we level the fuel octane at 87, well, then the GTI wins. If we run it at 93, well, then the Mazda 3 wins. I think I have no choice but to give the GTI this category because it can make that power at all fuel levels, whereas if we just drop the fuel, all of a sudden the Mazda 3 loses. And I don't think we should consider necessarily the fact that you're only going to give a car 93, you're only going to give a car 87. Now, stock driving dynamics, if we look at the Mazda 3, I think we can safely say that the Mazda 3 is at the bottom of this group. Now, why? Well, the Mazda 3, like I said, is very good. It'll probably outperform 95% of the cars in its class. Just right now, it's up against that other 5%. It has torsion beam rear suspension. The GTI and the SI have independent rear suspension. It has a 6-speed torque converter automatic. Civic Si, best in class manual. GTI, decent manual, amazing automatic. Just outclassed. So the Mazda 3 does not win this category. Now it's in between the SI and the GTI. Now, SI, when it comes to transmission, it wins. Why? Just because that manual transmission is so good. It's better than the GTI's manual, and while the GTI's automatic is great, it can't match the engagement the manual could offer you in the SI. When it comes to handling, once again, the SI wins. There are no shortage of comparisons online between the SI and the GTI, and the vast majority of reviewers conclude that they prefer the SI's handling over the GTI's. They feel more connected, better driving inputs, etc., etc. So the stock driving dynamics winner is the SI. So now we're at one GTI, one for the SI. Now, price here is an interesting category because when you talk about price, there's two things you can talk about. You can talk about the actual dollar value, or you can talk about the value proposition. If you look at the dollar value, clear winner, Mazda 3 was the cheapest, sub $30,000, fairly easy to find. Now, if you look at the value proposition, here's where the water gets a little bit muddy. Because if we talk about value proposition, that's what does each car kind of offer you for its money. The Mazda 3, you're getting a ton of luxury per dollar. The SI, a ton of handling and driving dynamics per dollar. The GTI, something in the middle. But I don't think we can talk about value here. Why? Because value depends on preference. Do you value luxury? Well, then you're leaning towards the Mazda 3. Do you value a raw driving experience? Well, then you're leaning towards the SI. So here, I'm forced to just use the raw dollar value, which means the Mazda 3 wins this category. So now we're all tied up at one apiece. Next, we arrive at comfort and practicality. I think there is no debate here. The Mazda 3 is the winner. That is easily probably the best looking interior in its class, probably the best tuned suspension for a comfortable drive. It wins points for practicality as well because of its all-wheel drive system. Yes, the rear seat is small, but it still beats both the SI and the GTI if you zoom out and look at the entire picture. The all-wheel drive alone, I think, outclasses them, which I know you're going to argue front-wheel drive with good tires is just as good as all-wheel drive in the snow. Fine, all-wheel drive with good tires is even better than front-wheel drive in the snow. So the Mazda 3 wins this category. Now, if we look at performance potential and aftermarket support, this one I think is quite clear-cut as well. The GTI is your winner. Mazda 3 has good hardware that probably can make a lot of power, poor tuning support. The SI, good tuning support, poor hardware. The 1.5 liter motor is a 1.5 liter motor. You can't do that much. Now, if you want both, you have the GTI, the clear winner. So we're sitting at one win for the SI, two for the GTI, and two for the Mazda 3. And that brings me to our conclusion, which is, what do you choose? And like it or not, the answer is it depends on what you really want. Do you want the most pure and raw driving experience? You're going for the SI. Do you want the most comfortable drive possible that has a little bit of sportiness in it? Well, then you're going to go for the Mazda 3. And what if you want neither of the extremes? That's where the GTI fits in. The GTI will get you about 80% of the luxury of the Mazda 3 and also about 80% of the driving dynamics of the SI, while offering more power and aftermarket support than both of them. And for me personally, the GTI is a clear winner. The GTI is that do everything car. It's the car that can be relaxing on the highway when you're tired. It's the car that can be entertaining on a back road when you find one. It's a car that you can take out, to meet your friends because it can fit all four of you. It's a car you can take your girlfriend out in because the interior is pretty nice. I just don't think there's any other car right now in the market for me that can do all of these things as well as the GTI does. And I think this is a perfect spot for me to stop talking about the article and maybe just wrap things up. So, will I be buying a GTI? That's the plan. Hopefully, in a few more weeks. I just need some time to get my money right, get all the finances organized, and then I will start going to dealerships around me and I will try to document a lot of that process. If you've made it this far in the video, I'm going to close it out here. Shameless plug, please go check out my blog at www.sharksauto.com. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing and liking and checking me out on all of my other socials at Sharksauto. Thank you guys for watching.